Welcome to the Quality Education Summit at the United Nations in New York City. This high-level action event on education is in the headquarters of the United Nations. We had here in UN headquarters yesterday the Quality Education Summit of the United Nations. For this high-level action event on education, we have now for an interview Dan Thomas. Dan Thomas is the spokesperson of the President of the General Assembly of the United Nations. It's a pleasure for me to ask you some questions.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you too. Is it possible to give us some numbers about the event, what we had here yesterday, and how many participants, countries, etc. like this?
So we had an SDG Action Event on education, a high-level event. We had 500 participants came, including 12 ministers or deputy ministers who were in attendance, as well as some civil society speakers and all the member states of the United Nations. So that would be the representatives of 193 countries.
Congratulations for this high participation.
It's an important meeting, and education is seen as one of the drivers of all the Sustainable Development Goals.
Yeah. So I think it was really the Quality Education Summit. It was
absolutely
not just an event; it was a real high-level summit for this topic.
Indeed, yeah.
And this shows already the importance of the topic.
Yeah.
The people mentioned already that we have still an education crisis. And already Peter Thompson, the President of the United General Assembly, gave us some numbers about this crisis during his speech.
Yeah.
And one of the numbers had been more 260 million children are out of school, etc. like this.
Absolutely.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, realizing education's great potential requires a massive scaling up of our efforts to achieve inclusive, equitable and quality education for all. We have to do no less than transform the way we think, invest, partner and deliver on education. Around our world, more than 263 million children and young people are out of school, with the number of primary school-aged children not attending school increasing each day. Incredible as it may seem in this day and age, 1/3 of the world's children do not have basic literacy and numeracy skills.
Also, Irina Bukova confirmed these numbers. I remember from her speech.
Education must become a priority for every government. Not just any education, but education that reaches every girl and boy, education that is relevant for societies and economies today and tomorrow, education for skills, lifelong learning, education for sustainability, and finally, last but not least, education for global citizenship. This calls for a new way of looking at financing. Moving forward, ladies and gentlemen, means crossing policy lines, catalyzing new synergies between health and education, between schools and workplaces. It means galvanizing old and new partners.
That's your impression also from her speech, or is this the right way, what I understood there from her speech?
Absolutely. I mean, 263 million children out of school. This is unacceptable in today's world. If we are to develop the world in a sustainable way, to achieve all of the Sustainable Development Goals, clearly young people need a basic education, and hopefully, better than that, a secondary and a tertiary education as well. So the first thing we've got to do is to make sure that we leave no child behind, that even in the poorest countries and the poorest parts of countries, that all children have a basic education. That is clear. That is the path to ensuring that the world is sustainable, that they have education so they understand, basic health care, education so that they're not exploited by, religious fanatics and encouraged to become, terrorists or pawns in a kind of global struggle. Education is a fundamental right for all children, And obviously, if we're going to achieve the 17 goals, we need to ensure that Goal 4, SDG 4, is achieved, because this is one of the linchpins of all of the Sustainable Development Goals.
Amina Mohammed, the Deputy Secretary of the United Nations, focused also on 5 interrelated areas.
I'd like to take a focus on 5 interrelated areas: finance, innovation, girls' education, lifelong learning, and education in humanitarian contexts. First, in finance. Funding is currently insufficient for education in many of our developing countries, whether it be from domestic or external resources. Globally, we must work with governments and donors to increase the funding dedicated to education around the world, and to help develop new approaches that go beyond traditional official development assistance. But it's also important here to look at the goals and how we can build economies and nations that grow, revenues that provide domestic resources, not as the add-on to education, but as the sustainability, that this is a basic right that domestic resources should be able to provide for in education, and for that matter, health.
Close to my heart. The delegate, the minister from Ghana, said that his government will now finance 100,000 students from primary school to upper secondary school, free of cost for the first time in the country's history. And that represents to me a movement forward, a watershed period, where 100,000 young Ghanaians can anticipate accessing secondary education. We've had a fabulous team. President has assembled a great big team. This is just a small number, and you it is to say thank you. You will declare the meeting closed by gaveling. All 4 of you will close the meeting off. We thank you very much. The meeting is closed. Thank you.
There's clearly a lack of funds for what's needed, with children out of school, with quality still a long way off in many situations. It's going to take money. And in this case, the richer countries are being asked to step up to provide funding. And this isn't just a charitable donation. This is fundamental to the achievement of the 2030 Agenda, to sustainable development in all countries. It's also fundamental to our own peace and security in the world. I mean, clearly uneducated people coming to live in our countries in the Western world, in the richer countries, is going to be a problem if these people are not educated, if they're not receiving a quality education. So it's in everybody's interests to ensure that education for all children globally is fully funded, so that children can get a basic quality education. That's the very bare minimum that's required.
During this Quality Education Summit at the United Nations, it became very clear that quality education is in the heart of all sustainable development goals. At the same time, Irina Bokova summarized that there are still some barriers. If we don't move away these barriers, we will not achieve the Sustainable Development Goal number 4, quality education. This cannot go on. Quality education must become a priority. Peter Thompson, President of the United Nations General Assembly, summarized that new challenges are still waiting. New specific strategies has to be developed. New actions are necessary to reach the Sustainable Development Goal number 4 until 2030. But where's the push for the future? I think that the education sector has now also to think about a stronger cooperation with G20. In 2017, the G20 announced that they will support the Agenda 2030. All G20 members agreed the Agenda 2030 with the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. The G20 economies account for 80% of world trade and 2/3 of the world population. The United Nations, as a permanent guest of the G20, could become a stronger role. A breakthrough is possible when quality education could become in future an own G20 education ministers meeting to implement together the Sustainable Development Goal number 4, quality education. For healthcare, there was this year already a good start at G20.